Stock Market Documentary Channel presents.
As U.S. election season heats up, many in the mainstream media are asking, why are Americans so frickin' angry? Why are millennials voting for an old cranky dude from Brooklyn? Machiavelli, of course, best understood politics, and he said, a son can bear with equanimity the loss of his father, but the loss of his inheritance may drive him to despair. That's right. The old man's gone, but where's my money?
Exactly. Generation Y has lost their inheritance. They've been disinherited from the fruits of all the previous generations and industrialization. They have been deprived of their, what the heck? That's terrifying. Don't look at me like that. Right. So, apropos of nothing, right? But let's talk about this new study out in The Guardian talking about this intergenerational conflict and the basically Generation Y, the millennials, who were born from 1980 until the mid-90s.
Oh, that's a millennial.
That's a millennial. I'm Generation X. I think you're the very last of the baby boomers.
Yeah, I'm a baby boomer. Last of the baby boomers.
The very last year. So you're almost like Generation X as well. So reveal the 30-year economic betrayal dragging down Generation Y's income. Exclusive new data shows how debt, unemployment, and property prices have combined to stop millennials taking their share of Western wealth. So the property prices in particular in Australia and UK have disenfranchised the millennial generation. Student debt in the US has contributed to their disenfranchisement. And a lack of jobs in Europe has resulted in their disenfranchisement. But globalization and longer lifespans and the huge benefits and wealth redistribution to the older generation has also contributed.
Not to mention robots. But
that's yet to come. That's
happening right now.
Yeah.
Millions of jobs are being lost to robots right now. These millennials are losing their jobs in record. It's all based on what I call the insexualization of the human experience, because the so-called gig economy, where people are working quick, jump into an Uber for 20 minutes to get a job. Quick, do a task for $5. Quick, do the. This is all part. If you look at an ant colony or a beehive, you see how insects organize themselves into their. That's a gig economy. Ants live in a gig economy. Now with everyone perpetually online, 24/7, connected through a central server, and that server's being controlled by a corporate overlord or a queen bee or a political psychopath. These folks who are connected are simply living task to task, minute by minute. They've lost all connection to humanity or being human. Their memories have been outsourced to Google or other stores of knowledge. They have no ability to think for themselves or be self-motivated in any way. They're simply being pulled around algorithmically by trashy economists and political.
But before we became intellectualized, before the gig economy, was the baby boom generation, was a Generation X generation. So let's look at what they created and what has resulted according to the data in this study that The Guardian is looking at. And they're looking at data from the Luxembourg income study. And they found that they looked at the economic situation solely in these countries: Australia, Britain, Canada, France, Germany, Italy, Spain, and the US. And they found that prosperity has plummeted for young adults in the rich world. In the US, under 30s are now poorer than retired people. In the UK, pensioner disposable income has grown prodigiously, 3 times as fast as the income of young people. And millennials have suffered real-term losses in wages in the US, Italy, France, Spain, Germany, and Canada. In some countries, this was underway even before 2008 financial crisis. But they said, for example, for the first time in France, recent pensioners generated more disposable income than families headed by a person under 50. In Italy, the average under 35 became poorer than the average pensioners under 80. Using the most recent U.S. data, in the midst of the downturn in 2013, average under 30s had less income than those aged 65 to 79. This is the first time that has happened as far back as the data goes.
Yeah, it's the metamorphosis economy. It's in between being in prison and being free. You're not either in prison or free. I mean, you're walking around and you're presumably a sentient human being, but because you're online 24/7 and you're being surveyed 24/7, and the government authorities are watching your every step, and they're using behavioral economics and subliminal advertising to influence you, to persuade you, you're being moved around by the forces of what are essentially master insectual beings that are controlling this millennial generation in ways that will go out and get the nectar and make the honey for the baby boomers, like myself. I'm more than happy to have all these 20-year-olds do all this cheap job.
The last year of the baby boomers are still as angry as the Generation Xers. So you
well, that's for different reasons, though. We're called Generation Jones.
Oh, yes.
It's, Barack Obama is actually with that generation.
Yeah.
We were the tail end of the baby boomers. We saw that man could land on the moon, but then we gave way to the chaos of disco. So we were on one foot on the moon, 1 foot on Donna Summers, one foot in Studio 54, one foot at the Sea of Tranquility on the bright side of the moon. That's Generation Jones, and we're caught in the middle.
Well, they do point out that it is that these promises were given for you could retire at 60.
You can never retire.
Now they've increased it to 65. Here in the UK, it's 67. They're actually talking about making it 75. So people, these millennials, don't realize it yet, but the intent is that the government wants them to work until 75.
The welfare state was invented by Bismarck in Germany, and it still works in Germany. It doesn't work anywhere else. It doesn't work in the United States, doesn't work in Britain, because those countries obey a different law of economics, not that kind of economics.
Well, exactly. In fact, Germany is in this next bit because they talk about the democratic imbalance and the fact that via the vote, the actual politicians are buying the vote of certain generation. And in the UK, in particular, the pensioners have won more than in any other country. They point out pensioner demands are not just beating down the financial prospects of new employees in the private sector, but retirees are also winning more from governments than they did a generation ago. Our figures show double-digit real-term growth and social transfers, what governments give out over 30 years to pensioners aged 65 to 79, ranging from as low as 26% in Germany to 146% in the UK. So there's been a huge shift from the younger generations to the older generations, in particular in the UK.
Look, if you saw that photo of Mark Zuckerberg in an auditorium surrounded by people wearing his virtual reality goggles, this is the casino gulag. Shareholders of Facebook are doing very well, thank you very much, because of this millennial insect generation plugged into virtual reality, clicking on ads. It's great for shareholders. Fantastic, thank you. But if you're part of that millennial generation and you're in the casino gulag, you're trying to make $5 by gambling on some virtual reality game, your life as a human is over, but somebody's got to go.
Well, of course, the millennial generation is the first to start paying what used to be called top-up fees here for university. It was free for the baby boom generation, for the Tony Blairs, for the David Camerons of the world to go to university here. It's still free to go to university in Germany, and many of the courses are actually in English, so you could theoretically just go to Germany. Many Americans are starting to do that. But also with all these programs like Help to Buy, the government here is saying that it's in order to help all these millennials get on the property ladder. Here in London, they have a special Help to Buy London. So they provide young people, first-time buyers, with 40% of the deposit from the taxpayer. But really who it's protecting is those same pensioners, because prices are 40% overvalued based on what the incomes are in the economy. So they have to provide taxpayer funds to give that 40% so that the prices don't go down.
Look, Britain is a rentier economy. It's been a rentier economy for 1,000 years. It's all based on the monarchy squeezing out rents from everybody else, and it's trickle-down rentier. It's not a welfare state. The post-World War II experimentation with a welfare state crashed on the shores of Thatcherism. And now we're back to a rentier economy, which Britain does best. I mean, people are confused because they're thinking, wait a minute, I thought there was a welfare state in play here. That was just a short-term blip. They try to mimic the Bismarck welfare state, but it didn't work in this country.
Before I go on to the NHS, I want to show a quick thing. This is from my Google Documents, my Google Drive, and this is from 2008 when I was getting ready to pitch Keiser Report, and at the time I called it Max Factor. That was the original name of the show. And I have a Max Factor Intergenerational Warfare. So we were already planning, we were talking about this in 2008, and planning to do an episode about that, and saw that happening, and that is happening.
Well, that's why I started buying stock in Corrections Corps of America, which is a publicly listed prison operator, and that stock's done fantastically well, because this whole new generation...
I thought you were going to say, put on Max Factor makeup when you are on the disco floor.
Oh, the disco? I remember very well, back in the late 70s, early 80s. Studio 54. I was there the night that she rode in on the White Horse. Mick Jagger's ex.
Mick Jagger's Bianca.
Bianca Jagger. I was there. She rode in on the White Horse. Andy Warhol and I got a big chuckle out of that. It was very, very great night. Very fun.
So here's another
it's
quick
not true,
chart.
Of course. None of that happened.
Here's a tweet and a chart. Breathtaking. It took just 2 years for Jeremy Hunt to completely wreck our NHS. Here are some maps. 2012, 2013. This is 2013-14, 14-15.
Yeah.
So green is not in deficit. Here's deficit. These are the regions of England and the NHS deficit growing.
Really? I thought this was a map of Israel blowing away Palestine. No, that's a different map. Now look, NHS is a vestige of the welfare concept post-World War II. But that doesn't fit with this economy. Now we're back to rentier. Jeremy Hunt is a rentier, working for rentier.
Part of what is the rentier, of course, is the PFI, the Private Finance Initiatives, built a lot of the NHS facilities. There's a huge charges for them every year, interest rates that go to them. But they also say the financial position of NHS providers in England has substantially deteriorated in recent years, falling from a net surplus of £577 million in 2012-2013 to a net deficit of £841 million in 2014-2015, and what they're going to do, what they do through all this piling of debt is of course, they get the millennials to hate it, and they want a new system, and that system is going to be like
It's time to go on to the second half. Look, there is no common good in this country. That's not it doesn't work well with the character here. That's not the point.
Well, ironically, of course, is bringing it back to the Bernie Sanders vote in America, is Bernie Sanders is promising a system closer to an NHS, because the system in America has bankrupted the country. It's
these are my virtual reality glasses. I can see millions and millions of millennials toiling at casino gulags and making me rich as the shareholder of Facebook.
You definitely look like an insect on the dance floor.
That could be a major disco hit. Insect on the dance floor. Well, stay tuned for the second half. We'll try to dance to it. Welcome back to the Keiser Report. I'm Max Keiser. Time now to turn to Professor Alison Pollock, an academic public health doctor and leading authority on private finance initiatives, PFI. Welcome to the show, Professor.
Hello.
Okay, so Alison Pollock, by the way, you were also in that film, Sell-Off. That was a fantastic film. We had Peter Bach on a couple of times talking about the NHS, the National Health Service, it's the British Health Service. The NHS Reinstatement Bill. Mm-hmm. You're a co-author of this bill. What does the bill say, and what hope of it is being passed? Tell us about it.
Well, perhaps I should say why we needed a bill in the first place. So, for the last 20 years, the government has been incrementally privatising and marketising our National Health Service, because the National Health Service in England is a universal health service funded through taxation and free at the point of delivery. And it's also publicly owned and publicly accountable. But for the last 20 years, we've seen incremental market changes. But in 2012, the government passed the Health and Social Care Act, which actually was the end of the NHS. It removed the duty on the Secretary of State for Health to secure and provide healthcare for everyone throughout England. And it actually accelerates the break-up, dismantlement and privatisation of our NHS.
Now the government, David Cameron, I believe if he were here, he'd say that's not true.
Well, that's what his Act does. His Act has been described as the Abdication Act. It takes away the duty on the Secretary of State to
But whenever someone
provide...
says, David, you're privatising the NHS, he says, no, that's not true.
Well, everybody knows that what politicians say and what the facts are something different. So I can only tell you what's in his law. So his Health and Social Care Act actually dismantles the NHS and removes the duty to secure and provide, and it brings in compulsory commercial contracting, virtually compulsory contracting, and breaks the whole lot up. So that's actually what we're in the middle of seeing at the moment. We're seeing the breakup of the NHS, the withdrawal of funds, and the breakup of services, and the reduction in entitlements. And so what we've been trying to do, and this is very in contrast to what's happening in Scotland and Wales, because Scotland and Wales still have a national health service, and there is still a duty on the ministers to provide universal health care. So for the last 3 years, since the Health and Social Care Act was passed, myself and a number of other colleagues, but especially Peter Roderick, who's the barrister, he is the key legal drafter of this bill. And
right, the reinstatement bill.
Well, it's called the NHS Bill 2015 because that's when it went into Parliament, but it is the bill that would reinstate our NHS throughout England.
And get rid of the 2012.
It would. That's right. It would
go
get
back.
Most
Go
of the
back in
arguments.
time.
Well, it wouldn't go back. It's going forward, actually, because it would give us back. It would bring back the NHS, but it takes us forward to a position where we once again have a universal healthcare system.
Yeah, but this has been, as you say, it's been going on for 20 years.
The incremental privatisation has.
Right.
But
Okay,
the
so
removal of the duty
2012 is
wasn't.
not the beginning of this. 2012 was just the latest in a long chapter. You know, why has this been going on for 20 years? Because the NHS is a huge piece of the British economy. It's like 10% or more of the GDP.
8%. Yeah.
What is it?
About around 8%, 7.5%,
8%
8%.
of Britain's GDP is this huge piece of the economy. That's a $2 trillion economy. It's like a $400 billion piece of business.
120 billion pounds, 130 billion pounds. Yep.
Okay. That, thank you. That is it's irresistible for private contractors to get in there and make money off it. In other words,
Yes, and one of the...
how are you going to stop that? They go in and they've privatized everything.
Yes.
And Britain's for sale.
Yes.
I mean, how are you going to stop that?
Well, it's a political decision as to whether you want an NHS or not, and how you're going to actually provide it, and how you're going to fund it. So that's a political decision. And in 1946, when you know the UK was broke, we got our National Health Service, and we've had it since 1948. But you're absolutely right.
But the ethos of 1946 and 1948, post-war, was of a welfare state here in Britain, and that's changed fundamentally. Britain is no longer interested in a welfare state. They're interested in having basically a financialized headquarters for global bank fraud in the City of London, and the NHS doesn't fit into that model, so they're dropping it off overboard and say, good luck, your costs are going to triple. We don't care who dies. People are dying in the street because of Cameron's anti-NHS policies, and he doesn't give a fig. He doesn't care if there's dead people. He doesn't care. So you have a prime minister who's completely not empathetic to this. And there's nobody in the leadership. Jeremy Corbyn, I would imagine, who's representing the Labour, is more empathetic to having a functioning NHS, correct?
Well, it's really what people want.
Is he?
And,
Is he? Would you say that's a fair statement?
Jeremy Corbyn is one of the co-sponsors of the bill. It's been taken,
so
it's got
with David Cameron, the Prime
cross-party
Minister
support.
characterizes him as a threat to national security. So here's a bold-faced lie from the Prime Minister saying that the opposition is a threat to national security. That's how much he's in the pocket of the bankers in the city. How are you going to stop that until Cameron stops swelling his pockets with all that venality? How are you going to get people to really care about it? Because certainly the BBC doesn't care about it. They're totally in the pockets of David Cameron's cronies. Who's standing up for this?
I don't know. I can't comment on that. But what I can say is that the NHS is still the most popular institution in the UK. And one of the big problems was that the Conservative government, the coalition government with the Lib Dems, they didn't have a mandate to actually break up and privatise the NHS. But what people want and believe in passionately is an NHS that's there when they need it. And that's why everybody is fighting so hard to bring it back and bring it back into place. Now, yes, we're up against a very difficult political situation, but we hope by building cross-party support with the Green Party, with the SNP, with Labour and with Lib Dems as well, that we're actually going to create enough of a groundswell that people want to bring it back. And I'm sure at the moment the Conservative politicians themselves must be very uneasy about what is happening, because many of them also fundamentally believe in having universal health care.
Let's talk about private finance initiatives, the PFI schemes, because here you have supposedly you're going to be mixing private and public. It's kind of a hybrid. And these have not worked out too well, have they?
No, you're absolutely right. The private finance initiative has been called the unacceptable face of capitalism by a Conservative chairman of a parliamentary committee, because the costs are so high. It's an engine for privatisation, and it diverts scarce money away from public services to, as you say, to corporations, to bankers and to equity investors.
Well, they say, the government says, we're going to take that debt off our balance sheet, and we're going to have Citi underwrite that debt. So therefore, you see, it's going to be cheaper. But then the people who are underwriting that debt become predators, become predatory lenders, and they gouge, and they steal, and they bankrupt, and then they leave the carcass for dead, and then they hire their buddies to come in and rebuild it at triple the cost.
We deal with the private finance in our bill, and we actually make it the Treasury's problem, because at the moment it's one of the big causes of hospitals going into debt and facing the financial crisis, because the annual charge that they pay for private finance, that's private debt finance, is so high it creates affordability problems.
How is that possible with interest rates at 0%?
Well, one of the problems is that the contracts, the interest rates are much higher than that.
Well, how can Royal Bank of Scotland or Barclays or Lloyds totally redo their contracts at the drop of a hat if it's in their interest? But when it comes to the NHS, they say, no, we can't redo the contracts. It's ironclad, it's copper bottom. We can't redo the contracts. We're locked in for life. So isn't that selective? It's selective punishment. I mean, you're saying that
it's a political process, but PFI is not just hospitals, it's schools, transport, and it's also, of course, being rolled out right across the world. So we have PFI in many, many countries, variants of private debt finance in many countries throughout the world. And it is an engine for privatisation and diversion of money away from the public. But actually we have part of our bill is, one of the clauses in our bill is committed to taking that debt and making it the Treasury's problem to solve, and to come back to Parliament with solutions for reducing the debt and reducing the payments and even bringing renationalising assets.
Okay, so the bill, the reinstatement bill, who's the barrister on this?
Peter Roderick is the legal drafter.
Peter Roderick. Okay,
yeah.
So how is this going? Is this gaining some traction? Is this
Yes,
where are we in this process?
Okay, so the bill, this is the third time the bill has been into Parliament, twice into the House of Lords, and then this is the second time, this is the third time, first time in the House of Commons, and it had its first reading in July with cross-party support. All of the SNP party, many Labour MPs, including Jeremy Corbyn and John McDonnell, and the Green Party was leading
But the
it.
SNP is so big in Parliament now. Is that adding some traction to this?
Well, I'm sure, because Scotland still has a National Health Service.
Right.
But the other thing that we're seeing, which we're very hopeful about, is that we're hopeful that the Shadow Health team will turn up for Labour, will turn up in force on Friday for the second reading of the bill. Of course, the bill will not pass in this Parliament, but what's really important is that all the other parties that are not currently in power get behind this bill and get behind the NHS and signal their support to the people for a national health service and the reinstatement of the NHS. So we're very optimistic that it will happen.
Yeah, okay, very optimistic. Sounds great. Third try. It's working through the political process. But again, so what's your feeling, though? I mean, it just seems like I do a show on the NHS every 6 weeks. We had the junior doctors on who are just doing the junior doctor strike because they don't want to pay doctors. You know, they don't want the government. The government under Osborne has doubled the national debt, but he says there's no money for health. So here's a guy who speaks out of both sides of his mouth. He's an absolute disaster. So, if the opposition is a national threat according to the Tories, And they say if you support the NHS, you're a terrorist, essentially.
Okay, well,
is what
I'm
they're
actually
saying.
on the BMA Council, and we're very supportive of the junior doctors' strike. And you should also know that this bill is also British Medical Association policy as well. So the BMA actually supports this bill too. So, you know, we've got the weight of the doctors too behind it. Now, the important thing about the junior doctors is that actually it's very connected with what's happened with the Health and Social Care Act. What the government ideally would like to do is move away from national terms and conditions of service to locally negotiated pay bargaining, which then means that, of course, hospitals and services are competing for different
Right, well,
junior
that's not
doctors.
efficient. It's like saying, why is it that if you have people who want to get a discount on a sushi bar, they'll go to Groupon, which is an online website, to negotiate en masse a discount, and that's capitalism. But if the public of Britain wants to get a discount on health care, that's outrageous communism that we can't abide by in the City of London. It's a total double standard.
No, of course, there's all sorts of double. I mean, one of the problems with when you pursue market ideology, you get all these other interesting conflicts that come up. And one of the things, that's why it's very important that people understand that the junior doctors' strike is also not just about the junior doctors, it's about what's happening to their and our National Health Service, which is why the junior doctors, the chair of the Junior Doctors Committee, has also supported in a letter to The Guardian this weekend the reinstatement of our NHS.
Alison Pollock, thanks so much on the ongoing NHS saga. Thank you.
Thank you very much for asking.
Thank you for watching. Please subscribe to our channel. Stock Market Documentary Channel presented.